May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We are in chapter 4 of the 13th book of Israel. A nice, beautiful one here. Gold, pure, fine gold, part 2, on page 23. Now, when we're preparing for a lesson, it's always our desire to bring a benefit to the student, to the listener, yourselves. And in this particular lesson, the 7-year peace plan has been given 9 months to birth, and it was dated 8/3/13. Now, as you go through this, Pastor brings up many topics, many points on this topic that bears a lot of information, a lot of research that's not contained, at least in my part here. We're going to dig into this and see what we can find. And the teacher following me is going to be beginning with a great encouragement to those of you who at times feel weak, faltering a bit, maybe a bit discouraged, not feeling like studying. Well, we do need Yahweh's help and Yahweh's inspiration, and it's very important to recognize where that comes from, and Yahweh tells us how to do that. Now, I'm going to be moving back and forth, but I'll let you know where I'm at in the lesson. Now, in this sermon, we first had the news, and Pastor wanted to bring certain things to our certain points to our mind. It shows the Pope, of course, in his confusion, which the Scripture shows, and then it shows the quartet. Now, I'm going to go into this a little bit here with the help of an article from RT and also a little bit of information from Wikipedia on the quartet. So, this interview was with a Ukrainian journalist being interviewed on RT, Helena Mokrushna, and she's a professor of, I think it's political studies in Ottawa, Canada. And you might remember Ottawa was part of the first global conference on peace in the year 2000. It's very interesting, some of the things that she says, and putting it together here. Vladimir Putin and Pope Francis, which met recently, are popular figures who impact people's thoughts. So I want you to bear that thought in mind, how they influence people's thinking, people of society, people who either support or don't support their government's choices, actions, behavior, and so forth. The Pope is a representative of a very powerful social institution. These are her words, which is the Catholic Church. So whatever he does or says has a big impact on people's thoughts and Catholic parishioners across the world. Putin is, of course, a most popular leader, according to Time magazine. They wrote an article on that. Especially the Pope represents the Western world, and Putin represents the Eastern world. Now, the quartet in Wikipedia describes it as the initiative to establish the quartet evolved following the outbreak of Second Intifada in September 2000. Now, the word initiative means, like in this country, we talk about the popular vote, or when they'll pass a petition and get signatures. Okay, this is an initiative. This is the idea. It's the majority opinion. And, of course, that can be influenced, right? So the initiative to establish the quartet, and remember the quartet is four nations or four groups made up of the United Nations, the United States, the European Union, and Russia. And I want you to notice that the word united is used twice in nations and states, and union implies unity. And in this lesson this evening, we'll be discussing unity in part and the importance of it. Now, the initiative to establish the quartet evolved following the outbreak of the Second Intifada. Intifada is an Arabic term, and it literally means shake or shaking. And you can put that together with your prophecy studies. Involving a large number of people, and in English, we typically refer to it as an uprising, a resistance, or rebellion, often against oppression. So this is what stimulated them to establish this group of nations to try to seek a resolution to this problem of violence between the Israelis and Palestinians. Now back to the interview. From what I've been following on Russia, Russia really tried all diplomatic means to solve this crisis. This is in Ukraine, with Ukraine. Russia used all platforms of international cooperation that are available out there, and frankly, it didn't work. Now she brings up the G7. France and Italy are part of the G7, and to a large extent, those are Catholic countries. So the Pope's condemnation of this so-called Russian aggression, quote unquote, would add to this mainstream popular narrative that Russia is an aggressor. So here we have a very influential person influencing the thoughts of the people, of the public, on this topic or this issue. And it's important for the U.S. to have the Catholic Church support in that regard. Now, the G7 is Canada, United States, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and the United Kingdom. The G7, this group of nations, is about one unified position in terms of the war in Ukraine. That is, they all have a unified position on their opinion or their view of that situation. However, there are complaints, I guess, because it comes from the realization that this group of countries who represent the same monopolar world, that is a single worldview, and they don't want to hear an alternative opinion. So they're very set in their ways in this. I think the Pope's position is very moderate and temperate in this regard. I'm moving through the article back and forth here. We're just picking out particular highlights or topics here, because the church should stay out of this conflict. I hope that Pope Francis will remain firm on this position. It's a civil war, and the church should not be involved in that conflict in a country like Ukraine, where the religious division is so deep. I'm paraphrasing there because of the particular language. Prime Minister of United Kingdom was Tony Blair up until 2007. He's a Roman Catholic. And Blair said, now remember, I just read that the Pope's position was that the church should not be involved in that conflict. Tony Blair was appointed a special envoy to the Middle East, working with this 7-year peace plan, and he said that religious leaders should be more involved in the peace process. Now that was in 2009, and then I believe last month he resigned from that post as special envoy. Many have come and gone in that process. Now, the quartet has had its criticisms and shortcomings. And on that note, we'll conclude this article here. Despite the significance officially attached to the quartet's part in promoting the peace process, many of its statements are merely repetition of previous statements, and no significant changes in policy by either the Israeli government or the Palestinian Authority have occurred resulting from a quartet meeting. Now, that's a criticism. The thing I want you to notice there is that despite what they say they're going to do, that is the leaders, politicians, the special envoys, despite what they say they're going to do or accomplish, they can't go outside the plan of Yahweh. It continues to follow the prophetic sequence. And even though it seems like they're not making any progress, we can look back, and if you had the Israel Book of Israel or the computerized one, you can go back and research the specific details of how things occurred, why they occurred the way they did, and where things are at now. So we see that through all this, they remain without a solution. We continue to see confusion rising out of that situation, but they're still working on it. They keep coming back to the table to try to work this out. Take notice of the quartet and their activities. The quartet is leading this, and remember what's been brought out about the catechisms of the Catholic Church. They wanted to hush that up when they found out I was quoting it, but they've got some other things in there about sodomy and the things they want to bring out, and it's got some more that they don't want you to know about. Now, to stay on topic, I'm going to go to verse 7, page 24. Now they're speaking of the 1993 Clinton-Rabin-Arafat peace agreement that we'll get further into later. But there's still one thing left, and that's the Oslo Accord. And this is what Barack Obama is trying to push through to bring peace. And he's very much behind it. The quartet is pushing this. Just because they backed up and in the background and pushing other people forward doesn't mean that they're not behind it. He mentions the 9 months goal, that the headlines on these articles, statement by the Middle East Quartet. And remember, Revelation 6 shows you the quartet and exactly what's going to take place. The House of Yahweh is the only one that's brought this out many years ago. In fact, the Mark of the Beast was written in the 70s, and that's when I first brought out about the 7-year peace plan. It wasn't signed until 93, September 13th, 1993. Before these events started taking place, the great Khan Yedidia Hawkins was sending me newspaper articles from different newspapers here in the U.S. showing these talks were going to begin. And President Obama had signed the agreements to start this thing, and great Khan Yedidia was bringing to remembrance the many scriptures, and he said everybody needs to read the Mark of the Beast. Middle East Diplomat Quartet welcomes renewed Israeli-Palestinian talks. So they are behind it. The House of Yahweh, Bible scholar publishes article, says one prophecy proves the whole Bible true. And these are the popular articles that are going out and being read by thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands now, and is being made available to them. So we have our influence out there as well, praise Yahweh. Now this prophecy, verse 12, actually does prove that you need to read that, study it closely. There's no other prophecies, including this quartet thing right now, and the Pope's confusion could even be known or fulfilled without that prophecy being fulfilled. Now back to verse 3. Now Pastor begins the topic of servitude. Count it all joy, just do it. Servitude. That's what the great Con Reynolds was talking about. I went back to 8:03:13, and these are my notes, and I won't have time, I don't think, to go through them all. But I want you to hear what Con Kepha Reynolds, who was being referred to here in Pastor's sermon, said on this day. I'm just going to just read it as I have it written and just pick out these little snippets, okay, little sound bites. The attitude of servitude and gratitude to succeed. What value do you place on your position in the work? Because, and he wants us to examine ourselves, because if we don't value the position we have in the work, how do you treat something you don't value? But if you value it, then you'll treat it with respect and treat it well. And remember what the peaceful solution teaches us. You know, Yahweh has not placed us here without a purpose, without value. All of us have value, and we can either squander that, or we can become more valuable by following the teaching and the trainings and examples that were shown here. Test and prove your own work. Measure it to a known, accurate standard. Now, what is that known, accurate standard? Well, it's none other than the 613 laws, of course, but in our daily lives, the peaceful solution is perfectly applicable to our daily lives. In fact, you can treat it like a recipe. If you don't like the outcome, if you don't like the way your life has turned out today or yesterday or next week, it has some bitterness, or it's not as sweet as you'd like it to be, you can change that. You can change the recipe if you're missing self-control, if you're missing respect, if you're missing anger control. The peaceful solution has methods and techniques to help you guard your thoughts, control your thoughts, and make a right choice. And stop and think about it in order to accomplish that. Develop the discipline to solve the problems. Fix the problems that arise. Don't delay. Each must carry the load that needs to be carried. The House of Yahweh delivers the truth. Now here's one about your rulers. 1 Kepha 2:18. You are not justified against your rulers. You can't say, well, he did, therefore I did this. Well, I messed that up because he did this. We are not justified in the Scriptures against our rulers. It is commendable, verse 19, to bear the pain of unjust suffering. Remember, Yeshua suffered unjustly for you. He was guiltless for what he was tried and convicted of by the Roman system. Okay, those are a few things, and Pastor said here's a few things, and he didn't have time to cover them either. But I forgot to bring this with me on the diseases. Okay. Another thing that was in the news at that time was the cyclospora infection. And as I recall, it comes from feces, human feces. If they spread human manure on crops, this can get on your fruits and vegetables. And of course, we're trying to come out of that as much as possible, but if you are in a position where you cannot avoid things that have been touched by worldly hands, water, and so forth. This is why we're taught koshering. We've learned things to be aware of in House of Yahweh. From the laws, we've learned to, watch out for uncleanness, different forms of uncleanness, and how that uncleanness comes about. Avoiding the blood and the microbes in the blood that can make you sick. These things are taught to us as a protection to us if we remember them and apply them. And this particular one is really hard to get rid of. And it's particularly prevalent in tropical areas. And this area here has become more tropical. We have the heat, the humidity, and so forth. And they've seen more and more of the tropical type diseases coming further north from where they normally reside. So this should be getting our attention. We should be alert to these things. The other thing that goes along with this is the use of antibiotics. And the trouble with the antibiotics is that the bacteria has a naturally occurring toxin. And when the antibiotics come in, it triggers this toxin. And basically, the bacteria gets the signal they're not hungry anymore. Okay, so it's kind of like if you stuff your face with a hamburger and a couple of hot dogs and a chocolate cake and a 16-ounce ice cream, and you're just, oh boy, I can't believe I ate all that. You know how that is, where you just couldn't eat another bite. And then you go to another situation where they've got this wonderful banquet and just, delicious food and everything's like, oh, can't stand to even look at it. I've had enough. Well, that's the way the bacteria get. And then they go to sleep. They go into dormancy and they wait. And once the antibiotic wears off and runs its course, then they wake up and go back to work again. And you have this cycle of disease. So they don't have the cure, not at the root of the cause there either. So STDs are a never-ending situation because the sin doesn't end. You can't get rid of something when you keep producing it. And of course, this is what they're doing right here. When you sit down on a dirty commode, it's going to get on you and it's going to get on your clothing. And if your children hug you or something, they'll get it in their mouth, in their nose and so forth. And you've got to be careful about these things. The more careful as you see the day approaching. So if we heed these warnings and learn the peaceful solution, it can help us avoid these things. But if we don't learn it, if we don't apply it, then we could end up like this character over here in verse 14. George Zimmerman, remember he's the one that got in an altercation with, was it Trayvon Martin? And ended up killing him. Okay, he's on trial for murder. Well, his father speaks up, Robert Zimmerman. Now, in his case, he was a retired military man, which means he studied war. He was also a magistrate judge, kind of like our justice of the peace that we'd have in a little town like Clyde. He, like the Pope, doesn't really have the right to judge anything right now. The whole world is so confused, they don't even know what is causing these matters, let alone being able to judge who's the guilty person, who actually brought this person to this condition. Well, his dad was military, also a magistrate judge, also a member of the Catholic Church. George was an evening receptionist at the family's parish, All Saints Catholic Church. So this is coming from also the confusion of the Catholic Church. So here in this one example, we have a situation of war to peace. How do you put those together? Remember when that person told Pastor, the military recruiter, he says, you got a war before you can peace. And that's the confused mentality that what you get in trouble for in school, riding home on the bus or in class, they promote in sports, yes, but they promote in the military and in the governments the way of retaliation. And it seems to be the only thing they are able to come up with at this point. Well, thankfully, we have the Peaceful Solution and Character Education program out there, working, influencing, reaching the minds of people, and even notable people. And in one discussion here, he quotes their discussion saying, "It might sound like a simple thing, but actually teaching about ownership and the right of ownership, as well as the basic concept of asking, are fundamental to instilling empathy and consideration for others and their property into our societies." And of course, societies being led by the governments. Ownership has been mistaught for thousands of years, and now the truth comes out about ownership. I'm in verse 25. Everyone needs to get that and read that. Now the Pope comes back and he says, well, who am I to judge? Well, it shows the confusion, because in the catechisms of the Catholic Church, they say the act of sodomy is sin. And if you notice the Pope's address to this, he never said anything or never mentioned anything about repentance, which is associated with sin. Now, if somebody comes to you and he says, well, I'm seeking the Lord, well, what does he mean? Is he wanting to repent of this sin? And does he admit it's sin? Now, he should have gone ahead and admitted that it's sin, and it's going to get you burned in hell, including the Pope. And the Scripture is very clear, very explicit on that. Well, now Yahweh said in these last days about this work that no longer will they even speak of what Moshe did in bringing the children of Israel out of Egypt. They're going to talk about, throughout eternity, what we're doing right now to bring out this following out of the clutches of Satan in this nuclear time period. This is going to be exciting, really exciting. We're building for a much greater work if we prepare for it. So continue looking up, looking forward, and continue your training. That's what he's getting ready for right now. The unity where he can actually work with us. We got to get to that place where we can be worked with by Yahshua. Pastor says in 1994, there was something that took place that I, was counting it a loss at the time, and now I see what Yahweh meant. So even Pastor at that time learned a great lesson here that, losing something you feel you want or you need can be very distressing. But Yahweh has a plan to work it out. If you get in your scriptures over to Zechariah 3:1, then he showed me Yahshua, the high priest, standing before the Malach of Yahweh, the messenger of Yahweh, with Satan standing at his right hand to oppose him. Yes, we always experience this opposition. We're seeing the Catholic Church come out real strong now and start trying to deceive the world, the total world, with these little remarks. Well, we're noticing too, and we're putting the message out there to counteract it. If you'll please stand, I'd like to introduce your next teacher. Please welcome the great Khan Matithya Hawkins. Praise Yahweh.
Shabbat Shalom, great men of Yahweh. You may be seated. May the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. We're going to continue on here in the 13th book of Yisrayl, part 2. The 13th book of Yisrayl, part 2, gold, purifying gold. We're going to be picking up here on page 27. And just to rehearse here, this is the sermon given August 3rd, 2013. And the title of this sermon, this is chapter 4. The title, The 7-Year Peace Plan Has Been Given 9 Months to Birth. The 7-Year Peace Plan has been given 9 months to birth. And the great Khan there covered some of the controversy between the world, and speaking with the different nations and their fighting and their continual warring that they're going after. And Pastor shows here, and the rest of this sermon here, we're going to be covering some of these key verses here that go over what we must be doing to make sure that we don't become like the war-raging nations. What we must be doing. And if you go over here in page 27, verse 34, Pastor says, this just shows you how close Yahweh is to His house and how He's guiding and directing His house, making sure everyone is right to be used. He can use anyone when they're in unity with Him. And when you're not in unity, when they're not following what the great Khan Kifa Reynolds Hawkins just brought out, you're not in unity with Yahweh and you need to start. I know, and with what Khan had covered there a little bit there about where Khan Kifa had covered, what value do you place on your position in the work of Yahweh? And all of us, we have to have that burning desire to push forward in the work of Yahweh. To be in unity with Pastor by pushing forward this work. This has to be number one priority in our lives. And we have to be in unity with Yahweh's house and getting the work done. Sometimes the way the mind works, we show up to help with a project or a job or something that maybe we were asked to assist in, or there was help needed, or, help wanted we might have responded to here in the work. And sometimes we might start finding our minds actively running to try to, instead of do what we've been assigned to do, to try to, fix this problem, fix that problem. We have to be in unity with Yahweh's house, knowing that, like Pastor said, you can find 10,000 reasons to leave Yahweh's house, and you need to be focused on the one reason why you need to stay in Yahweh's house. If you go and if you don't guard your mind and you go into an area, any area, you could come in here for class, and you could so easily, be distracted, and be like, man, how can we have class in here? There's a dust bunny under my table. Didn't they clean the sanctuary properly the other day? They need to clean the sanctuary properly. Whoa, we can't have class till we clean the sanctuary properly. And that's just one example. But there's many others where we might go to find our place, or we might be given a place in Yahweh's work, and instead of putting our hands to the plow, we want to tell the... I don't know what they call the man who hooks up the plow to the horse, how he did it wrong, and he was supposed to do double knot braids and, twisty curls, and he must have not went to Boy Scouts because his knots are all wrong. We got to retie this whole plow. We have to be focused, and with this sermon Khan Kifa gave about being in unity with Yahweh's house and in the benefit of getting the work done, we have to be focused on what is our assignment. Are we doing our assignment? Okay, what is our assignment? Are we doing our assignment? Remember, Yahweh said, we're going to cover in Ecclesiastes, if you have for your notes or if you have your book of Yahweh, we're going to read a little bit more here. We're going to go to Ecclesiastes chapter 5. Pastor says, I know it's hard. I've been down that road many times and still crossing over rocks and stumbling stones and ditches. Well, if it's a surprise to you and, no matter how recent you are, whether you're 30, 40 years recent to Yahweh's house, or 3 or 4 days, or 3 or 4 months, there's going to be stumbling blocks, ditches, tests, and trials before you when you go to put your hand in doing Yahweh's work. Okay? There's going to be tests and there's going to be trials. And the adversary, Satan the adversary, is very tricky. She's going to try to make it look like someone's purposely trying to hinder you. Okay? And it's going to be your brother or your neighbor or the guy that stepped on your toe, and he's just trying to hinder you from doing the work of Yahweh. Okay? These are attacks. Remember Daniel 7:25, these mental attacks. But Pastor said, I know it's hard. I've been down that road many times and still crossing over rocks and stumbling stones and ditches. But it's easy for you to let your temper flare up. Sometimes it's even harder to kick yourself and put it back down. But you can do it if you set your mind in advance and ask for Yahweh's inspiration. So you see there, you got to have the peaceful solution. Okay, so if you haven't figured it out yet, you have to have the peaceful solution in your life. You have to use it and apply it in your life. You have to learn it in order to apply it in your life. And without it, you're not going to be able to do what Pastor just said right here, set your mind in advance. Okay, you're not going to be able to get your temper down after it flared up. But you can do it if you set your mind in advance and ask for Yahweh's inspiration, total 100%. But you can't ask for His inspiration unless you're willing to begin with to do it. Okay? And you can't question Yahweh in the fact of, why is Yahweh inspiring me to do it like this? Or, why did Yahweh bring me here in this situation? Or bring me here in that situation? Or, man, if I was going to have to be 40 years in the wilderness, I thought Yahweh would at least brought me with a whole herd and a multitude of herds. So set your mind in advance to first shut your mouth, Pastor says. That's the hardest part. It's pretty hard to do sometimes. Okay, if anyone has any experience, if not, I can give you my experience. The lips sometimes move quicker than the brain if you're not really guarding yourself, setting your mind in advance, if you're not practicing the peaceful solution, if you haven't learned the peaceful solution, if you haven't humbled yourself to realize that you need the peaceful solution in your life. So set your mind in advance to first shut your mouth. That's the hardest part. And this is where we can go to Ecclesiastes quickly for your notes. Ecclesiastes chapter 5, and this is right outside our door where we enter the sanctuary, men. It's been up there for a while, so maybe we haven't read it lately. But right along with seek the habitation of your Father, seek first the kingdom of Yahweh. Ecclesiastes 5 verse 1, keep your foot, watch your step when you go to the house of Yahweh, and be more ready to listen than to give the sacrifice of fools, for they do not even realize that they do evil. Do not be rash, reckless with your mouth. Do not think of hastily uttering a word before Yahweh. Okay, we have to remember when we come to Yahweh's house, men, we're going to be tested, we're going to have trials, there's going to be setbacks, okay? But we have to make sure, as Pastor shows right here, to shut our mouths. That's the hardest part, to humble ourselves, to get a hold of that pride that we all have. What a big fire a little tongue can start. And you start popping off, you shut yourself off from Yahweh, Pastor says here in verse 36. So you shut yourself off from inspiration. Okay, so if you start not keeping your foot, watching your step, guarding your tongue, setting your mind in advance to be more ready to listen than to disagree or come out of unity with Yahweh, Yahweh's house, Yahweh's one sent, Yahweh's chosen branch, the spokesman. And we have to get it into our minds is that we're not ever going to be smarter than Pastor. It's just not possible. Okay? Yahweh's always going to be wiser and more knowledgeable than Yeshua. Yeshua is always going to be more wiser and knowledgeable than Yahweh, or than Yisrayl. And Yisrayl is always going to be more wiser and knowledgeable than us. Okay? The servant is never above his ruler. Okay? The student is never above his teacher. Okay? It's not like a shame or a shunning. No, we all have the opportunity to graduate this class and receive these positions, these jobs that is going to be offered in Yahweh's soon coming kingdom. Okay? These great jobs, magnificent, glorious jobs, which will make the hardest test or the hardest flare-up that we might face here at this time, or that we faced last week, or that we're going to face next week, seem like absolutely nothing. But if we start popping off with our tongues, with our mouths, speaking a rash or harsh word, or making a very uneducated decision to speak without knowledge, you shut yourself off from inspiration, with that little tongue. And then, so if you shut yourself off from inspiration, and then it gets harder. Okay? So when you start popping off, you shut yourself off from Yahweh. So you have to set your mind in advance to first shut your mouth. Because if you don't, then it gets harder, Pastor says. And that's when you start thinking, well, why am I here? I hate this place. I hate to overcome. I hate to look forward to a job in the kingdom. I hate all these blessings that Yahweh is calling me to and giving me right now. I hate all this knowledge that I'm having to absorb. And you can add on that. I hate how hot it is. I hate how cold it is. I hate how wet it is. I hate how dry it is. I can't stand the way Comatita stinks today. These dust bunnies under this table. Man, I hate this place. So dirty. Can't believe we're having class. Dust bunnies are under the table. I hate all this knowledge that I'm having to absorb. These are the things that are going into your mind, but you're not saying that, but these are the things that are actually getting to Yahweh. And how does this take place? Just jump back right there to the beginning of verse 36. If we don't shut our mouths, control our tongues, we start popping off, speaking against Yahweh's work, speaking against Yahweh, telling Yahweh how he should have brought us here, or he should have made us supervisor before the supervisor, and how come we're in Yahweh's house now, and the supervisor has been in Yahweh's house, and he's the supervisor, and we should have been the supervisor, and then he should have come to the house. But if you start popping off, you shut yourself off from Yahweh, and then it gets harder. And that's when you start having these foolish thoughts. Because these are the thoughts, men, that we have to guard ourselves against, because these are the thoughts. You turn over to page 28. These are the thoughts that the war-raging nations, if you go back all the way back to 1 Samuel 8, or even before that, if you want to go all the way back to Genesis 4, these are the thoughts of mankind. I hate this, or I hate that. And these thoughts Yahweh hears, even though maybe we're not saying some of these things, but we're thinking them. But because we spoke foolishly, these are the thoughts that are building in our minds. We have to bitterly repent of these things and turn from this way. If you look at the prophecies that Yahweh's laid out, and you look exactly how everything's fallen into place up until this time period that we're in right now, men, it's absolutely impossible for all these things just to coincidentally have occurred. For there to be two brothers from the same womb, they just coincidentally establish a place called the House of Yahweh. Okay, they coincidentally call upon the name Yahweh and push Yahweh's name and bring Yahweh's name back to this world which is turned from Yahweh for over 1,600 years, 1,600 years. Is not a coincidence. We need to humble ourselves and get in unity with Yahweh's house so we can be a benefit in assisting the house of Yahweh bring forth this work. If you look in verse 43 on page 28, Pastor says, you see the purpose there. This is towards the bottom of verse 43. You see the purpose there is for you to assist in the house bringing forth fruit. Okay, you can't tell the tree how it should have grown, or, I can't believe you're a fig tree. How come you're not an apple tree? Apple trees should be right here, not fig trees. Man, I can't believe you're a fig tree. You should have been an apple tree. The fig tree should be in that field. You've got to assist in the house bringing forth fruit. You've got to be a member of the team. Remember, there's no I in team, the old saying. There's no I in team. Assist in the house bringing forth fruit. You are my fruit, Pastor says. You are my fruit. Now, if you invite others under this vine, which is Yeshua, which that's what every man is going to be doing, every man and woman in the house of Yahweh. Noah wasn't the only one who's going to be doing this, Pastor says. Okay, so we have to, and an invitation isn't just like, you write it down and you send it to someone. Remember, actions speak louder than words, and they get to Yahweh first. The way we handle ourselves every day, men, every day, whether we're around brothers or whether around Gentiles, or maybe we're not around no one, but the way we handle ourselves is actually being an invitation to people of why they would want to be a seed of Yisrayl Hawkins, a member of Yahweh's house, or it's the biggest reason why they have no reason to want to come anywhere near or hear anything of the house of Yahweh, Yisrayl Hawkins. Okay, and our invitation can be just our actions, just our attitude, just the way we say things or do things or the way we treat each other. Now, Pastor goes on here in verse 52, and if you jump up to verse 51, he's reading in Yachanan chapter 15 and verse 3. It says, you are already cleansed. And this is the law and the prophecies. You're already cleansed through the word. This is the law and prophecies of Yeshua. Now we know here from Yachanan 15, 1 through 5, we haven't read it yet, you're already cleansed, it says in verse 3. And then in verse 4, abide in me. He says now in verse 4 now that abide, it means to be strong, steadfast, as he describes so many times, as a stone or a rock. And Yahweh is the rock. He's the foundation. You know, it didn't say that upon this beautiful rose bush, Yahweh's house would be built. Upon this rock. You know, it might not be the prettiest stone. It might have been rejected by the builders. But upon this rock, He's the foundation. He's the foundation, and that's what everything else is built on. Same thing in Yahweh's house in these last days. Yisrael Hawkins is the foundation of Yahweh's house. We have to be in unity with Him by following exactly as He's instructing us. Everything else is built on is Yahweh Himself. He's the foundation, and that's what everything else is built on. Is Yahweh Himself, as Yeshua said, this rock, this stone, so abide in me. Be strong. Don't be one way one day or 1 hour and then change your mind and go the other way. Remember the forked tongue? The forked tongue speakers, as Pastor said, the Native Americans used to call the white man as the forked tongue speakers. They'd say one thing, and then the next day, this day they'd say, hey, give us all your guns and y'all can stay in your little land and we'll have peace. And the next day they were riding through and killing everybody because they spoke with a forked tongue. Hypocrites. Remember Yeshua said, hypocrites. Don't be one way one day or 1 hour and then change your mind and go the other way. Abide in me and I in you. Abide in me so I can abide in you. So you can abide under this vine. Continuing on in verse 54, Pastor says, just as the branch cannot produce fruit by itself, I cannot produce fruit by myself. I depend solely upon Yahweh and Yeshua. I am the branch in this time period. Praise Yahweh. And Yahweh willing, we're all in agreement that Yisrael Hawkins is Yahweh's chosen branch. Now remember, Yahweh is the rock and the foundation upon which everything else is built on. And Pastor says here in verse 55, when it speaks of the branch, it's speaking of the branch. Abide in me and I in you. Just as the branch cannot produce fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, Yeshua, now everybody right now is saying, come under the vine. Come under the vine. The other says fig tree. But it should have been translated what? Olive. Olive, not fig tree, but olive tree. Neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine. That should establish He is the vine. They, the commentators, that try to interpret these things, and we're going to skip down here for the sake of time, down to verse 57. Yachanan 15:5, I am the vine. Well, what is he talking about? Back in Zechariah. Remember Zechariah chapter 6. Everyone's going to be invited, everyone under the vine and under the branch. The branch. Praise Yahweh. You're under it now. You've been invited here. Just don't leave. Be firm. Be strong. Be spiritual. Spiritually minded. You cannot move a spiritually minded person because it's based on the laws. And there was a sermon, I think it was playing today on the radio, and Pastor said, there's never been such a great opportunity to be able, as there is right now, where if someone's mind is solely set on learning the peaceful solution, which is Yahweh's laws, they can come to Yahweh's house, they can learn the peaceful solution, okay, and they can obtain an eternal position in that. This time period, right now, and that's what Pastor says right here, be firm, be strong, be spiritual. Spiritually minded. You cannot move a spiritually minded person because it's based on the laws. And Yahweh willing, we're building our spirit, our spirituality through the training and the learning that comes from Yahweh through Yahweh's chosen branch. And in the books of Yisrael, the Yisrael Hawkins says, because if you think that you can take the scriptures and you can figure it out, that's not what you're inspired to do. None of us are inspired to take the scriptures and figure it all out. Yahweh's whole plan. Yep, we're going to figure it out. We're going to get sent off on our own little place. Now, Pastor is inspired to understand the scriptures. Okay, and we are given the inspiration to understand what Pastor teaches. But we have to study these things. We have to be spiritual, spiritually minded. You cannot move a spiritually minded person. And if we're not constantly forcing ourselves, because it takes prodding and nudging and pushing. If we're not pushing ourselves to study, Satan has a gazillion other things to consume our minds with. A gazillion other things. But a spiritually minded person bases his mind on Yahweh's laws. You're only going to learn Yahweh's laws here at Yahweh's house from Yisrayl Hawkins. That's the only place we're going to learn Yahweh's laws. He bases his mind on Yahweh's laws and says, this is it. This is my foundation. This is where I'm going to stand. No ifs, ands, and buts. Praise Yahweh. Yeshua is the vine. That settles a matter. We got a branch that started a house of Yahweh in these last days. Prophesied. Before any of us were ever here. When this work started, none of us were here. Okay, we were foreknown, but we weren't here. This work was started by Yahweh's chosen branch. Okay, under inspiration of Yahweh, through guidance of the high priest Yeshua, this work was started by Yisrayl Hawkins. And then Yahweh brought us to Yisrayl Hawkins to be able to learn Yahweh's laws, so that we'd be able to be a benefit, be able to help produce fruit, help gather the harvest, and bring forth this continual pattern of teaching and training and guiding and leading, which is the only way that all problems or any problem in the world is going to be solved. All or any. The only way they're going to be solved is through Yahweh's laws, and it's only going to be through those who have learned, who've humbled themselves. They've learned to get control of their tongue, get control of their mouth, get control of their thoughts, and they've learned how to go and teach exactly what they've been instructed to teach. And no ifs, ands, and buts about it. No turning to the left nor to the right, or, it's okay to, break that law as no one's looking, or it's okay to break that law, as long as you're going to ask for forgiveness later. No, we have to teach exactly what Pastor's teaching us, and there's no ifs, ands, and buts to keeping Yahweh's laws. Our minds have to be based on Yahweh's laws, be spiritually grounded and based on Yahweh's laws. Now, continuing on here, if you go to page 30, in conclusion. In page 30 here, starting in verse 63 here, you see the prophecy, Micaiah 4, 1 through 4, or 1 through 3. It's also written in Isaiah 2, verse 2 through 4. Yahweh says, in the last days, I will establish my house. Now, this was written in about 710 BCE. Any of us around back that far? I know we got some long timers here, but 710 BCE, anyone been here that long? No. Everyone from 710 BCE has been buried and turned to dust. Now, there was a lot of water went under the bridge, between that and the last days. Because the last days are described by Samuel as two people in a future day preaching. And they bring many sons to righteousness. They shine as the stars of heaven, he said. They're going to. And they bring many people, he says, under this vine and under this fig tree. This branch of Yeshua and his apostles who is standing strong on these last days. It's really something how the prophecies are. They all started with the house of Yahweh being established in the last days, under the authority of Yeshua. That's in Genesis 49, but before that, it was shown by Abel. And then you come on down to Zechariah, speaking again now in these last days in chapters 4 and 5, showing the branch. What are these two olive branches? In Revelations chapter 11, if you remember that, these two witnesses are the two olive branches. So that tells you who are the two olive branches. They're two olive branches, so you have to go back into the prophecy and see, lo and behold, here in Zechariah chapter 4, and even before that he shows it, even in chapter 3, he shows it, but the whole thing is shown here. But it's not to take place until Yeshua has been murdered. The scripture is all wiped out, forbidden to be owned. And this took place for 2,000 years. And all of that prophesied that it would be taken away and changed and destroyed even. They couldn't destroy the word completely. There were always the Norahs that kept the word going, kept it going. And they wrote what they could and said what they could. They gossiped about it. They didn't gossip about each other. They gossiped about the work of Yahweh and how what a wonderful thing it was and how he was bringing this, that is, going to bring this to perfection. And we need to take a an example here, a play out of Nora's game book here, is our gossip needs to be about Yahweh's work. Okay, about what a wonderful thing it is and how it brings us to perfection. That's what we need to be gossiping about. Not about each other, okay, or, the person who stepped on our toe or, rubbed us the wrong way or looked at us funny or whatever Satan's trying to allow our mind to be attacked with. We should be gossiping about this work, the work of Yahweh, what a wonderful thing it is and how it brings us to perfection. And there's no shortage of righteous things to be dwelling on, man. Pastors made it possible where we'd be able to consistently and constantly learn. We don't even really have to do nothing except show up. We just have to show up. And then, of course, you have to pay attention, but, just showing up, and then you start learning how to pay attention. Okay? Well, it's here. The last days are here. The Pope is standing in total confusion. The quartet is fixing to, as Russia said, Russia and China are preparing for global war. Russia and China preparing for global war. And look, this was in 2013, 2 years ago almost. And look how much closer we see that Russia and China have gotten to world war, global war, against those who are trying to enforce this new world order, this democracy as they call it. Okay, well, we know they're not trying to push freedom of speech and freedom of religion. They're trying to push the desires and the wills of Mother Mary here in the Catholic Church, making money off of people and owning the world. Russia and China are preparing for global war. Russia and China preparing for global war. Well, of course, the quartet's moving forward. The Pope is moving forward with his plans. Remember now, Malachi Martin exposed their plan in the book, The Keys of This Blood. And he himself used the catechisms of the Catholic Church in writing that. And he outlined the plan of the Catholic Church to bring forth this war. In verse 68, but this war is not coming accidentally, brethren. It's planned. It's planned and they're carrying it out. And they intend on depleting the population and getting to where only the Catholics are left alive on the face of the earth. That's Satan's plan. Of course, that's the Pope's plan. Satan plans on destroying the whole thing. Catholics, Muslims, everyone. And Yeshua says if she can do it, then these words won't endure. But he said she won't prevail this time. May Yahweh bless you, and I'll turn the services back to the next speaker. I love you. Praise Yahweh. And in conclusion, men, here, we have to look at this closing Pastor showed here about the state of the world. And Yahweh set before us a choice, okay, as is shown in Deuteronomy chapter 30. We have a choice of whether we're going to be a part of this war-raging system or whether we're going to be a part of this this creation and government of Yahweh, the great administration of Yahweh that brings peace to the universe through the teaching of Yahweh's laws and the peaceful solution. And in closing here in Jeremiah chapter 23, Jeremiah 23, 5 through 8, it says, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that I will raise to David a righteous branch, and a king will reign and succeed, and will execute judgment and justice in the earth. In his days Yahweh will be saved, and Israel will dwell safely. And this is the name that he will proclaim to them, Yahweh our righteousness. Therefore, behold, the days come, says Yahweh, that they will no longer say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up the children of Israel out of the land of Egypt. But they will say, as surely as Yahweh lives, who brought up and led the seed of the house of Israel out to the protected place, and from all the countries where I had driven them, and they will dwell in their own land. And brethren, we have this opportunity. We've been led here to Yahweh's house. We have this opportunity to be this shining light to all the world and the universe and all creation, if we can continue to put these words of life that Pastor's given us in action in our daily lives. Yahweh bless you, men.